Thank you for staying with us. Indeed, we can have a world of ordinary people that would live life the way the Creator wants us to. And one of those ways is, don't just live for yourself. Live and care about somebody else. Your life is not all about you. Okay, so hold on there. So our first topic, we'll get the show going. A look at the Economic Sustainability Plan. The fallout of the coronavirus pandemic on the economy is no doubt worrisome, but the federal government is attempting to strengthen the economy, doing its best to strengthen the economy, they say. On Wednesday, the Federal Executive Council approved the Economic Sustainability Plan recommended by the Economic Sustainability Committee led by the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo. The plan is to help cushion the effects of the pandemic on the economy. We take a look at how truly that plan will help to sustain the economy. Okay, so joining us is a principal partner with Dion and Associates, and he joins us from Kent, England, Mr. Charles Iyore. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Iyore.
Good morning. Good morning, viewers. Good morning, Mr. Egbe.
How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's pretty warm out here in England, but it's all right.
Indeed, it's all right. Let's look at this whole thing. Yes, globally, we know that the pandemic's affected economies across the world. No economy has been insulated from this whatsoever. One way or the other, they've all been impacted. But if you were to look at it generally, before we come down to us here, what would you say it's been like for the economy?
Globally, I think the global economies are having the biggest shock of their time. I was at the FT webinar with the governor of the Bank of England. That's about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and he had put in 200 billion pounds into the economy. Last week, they put another 100 billion pounds into the economy. That's to the extent that they've had to sustain jobs. But because the linkages are working, it's easy to know where the money will go. It's not likely that's going to be wasted. And if they need to take the money out of the system, they know exactly what to do. America has similar figures, much larger. So the world is aware that times are not normal. And the world needs to know that those who can't go to work need to be supported. Otherwise, they'll be totally out of the picture. For us in Africa, I don't even think our own economies were broken before. So the COVID crisis weaken it even further. So let's see how this gives us an opportunity to press the reset button and do a good job.
Talking about pressing the reset button, the federal government has come up with what they call a transit plan, between the Economic Recovery Growth Plan and the Economic Recovery Growth Plan successor plan currently being worked upon. That transit plan, that's the NESP, they call it, the Economic Sustainability Plan. Now, in that plan, the committee recommended or put forth about 2.3 trillion to help cushion the economy and move it forward. Is it about the monies, or is there something that is workable in that plan?
Okay. Thank you very much. I cannot comment on that plan because I didn't draft it. So I'll comment on that plan based on what my expectations are as an individual and those on whom the plan will be executed. So broadly speaking, I will say that the all economies, and the Nigerian economy is no different, is like a market. And people need to go there with their resources and savings to get what they need first. Then they start getting what they want, which is a want list can be large. Now, in our own economy and in most of Africa, only a very small population can go there to get what they need and want. The large majority of people can't even afford what they need. And the list of the things they can afford reduces every day as their currency suffers. What that indicates is that the economy is basically unstable. Now, a situation where you can't even buy what you need cannot just be a matter of what is in your pocket. It may well need to do with the way the trade and exchange linkages are working. So I'll give you an example. When we had the colonial masters, they put in the big rail system to take away all of the cash crops. They were not interested in what your food crops were doing. Immediately they left. Even that cash crop evacuation system was destroyed or not neglected. And everybody began to focus on this mineral item, which is all shrouded in secrecy, to be able to do what they needed to do. When it became a situation where there was bother in the society, they began to use that same money to import food items because they couldn't produce their own locally. So you had food riots all over the place. So for me, if that can be addressed by the economic sustainability plan, then I would say we've done well. I don't want a situation where the MDAs become the government itself and or the people themselves, and then hopefully if they do well, everybody will benefit. I'd rather have a target of where we want to go as a nation, and then the MDAs use their resources to achieve those objectives. So that's what I'm saying. Many people are going to the market, they can't get what they need. And you can't use, because this is about almost 90% of the population, you can't use safety nets to carry that. And safety net is going to break. So we need to be able to see, can the people, after all this, become part of the equation? More than 90% of Nigerians, and indeed all Africans, are excluded. In my own view, the only two countries you can take away from this are Morocco and Botswana. The jury is still out for Rwanda because it's the first position. And South Africa is unraveling. So, and I think to a large extent, Nigeria has what it takes to set the standard for the world. And hopefully they'll do it. I wasn't part of drafting the plan. I'm just telling you what my expectations would be and what societies will expect to see if the plan is properly executed. Thank you.
Okay. The thing about plans, economic recovery plans around the world is that most of them are talking about stimulus packages. But from what you put out there, you said something about people going to the market and not able to get what they need. In this plan, the federal government is putting forth about 500 billion, or thereabouts, I want to be fair, 500 billion as a stimulus package. It's already appropriated for in the amended 2020 Appropriation Act. But the question of distribution of that 500 billion would now come in. How effective would the distribution be? In your expectations, again, since you're talking about expectations here, do you think it will be properly distributed, and what areas should they focus on?
Well, I was still in Nigeria when the COVID-19 started. I was asked my opinion about what would be done because I told everyone then that I think that our doctors can manage the medical situation. I've never had a challenge with Nigerians being able to do it. They did it well in Ebola. But I felt that the way we distributed our resources would be flawed. And that's where we will unravel, not the medical side of it, the economic side of it. And I suggested then that what they needed to do was to ensure that this was a joint effort, not distributing money to people. For example, I said you should create food banks all over the place. And then you need to qualify to be able to go to the food banks. Now, most of them have donations from all agencies, but there's no structured way of accessing food in the food banks, apart from what they pack and distribute all over the place. So you're giving food to those who might not need, and those who need might not get it. That's the first one. The same thing happens also how you distribute your drugs. So at the end of the day, it's about our logistics plan and the way we procure what we need to distribute. If you don't get those things right and the system unravels, that will be our failure. And for me, really, I won't be able to say if it's been distributed well or not. We need to know all the food that has been given as donations to the states, which are not in food banks. Clearly, there are no food banks. How much of it has been clearly distributed? So it's only those who are there on the field who say, has the food gotten to them or has it not gotten to them? I have a feeling that there's always a sense of urgency amongst us Nigerians. When the challenge is high, we always rise up to the occasion. No one had expected us to survive with Ebola. And I had the opportunity of speaking to the president of the World Bank somewhere in England. And he was asking me, how did you get out of Ebola? And I said, well, our doctors are fantastic. And generally, if we rise up to the occasion, we can come. But very often, we don't rise up to the occasions. We are covered in bubbles, Where does it come from? What is religion? What is creed? Those bubbles really don't work. If those bubbles are not allowed to play and competence and strategies come into play and everyone's not being tactical about quick advantage or quick wins, we should be able to do it. I think the personnel we have both in the cabinet and outside can do a good job.
All right.
Our doctors, can you see, have done very well.
Okay,
Kudos to them.
Mr. Yori, we'll take a moment, but we'll come back to continue the conversation. Viewers, just stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We're still looking at the Economic Sustainability Plan, and when we're on that break, we're joined from our Abuja studio by Mr. Odilim Ewengbara, who's a development economist. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just hit you up straight. Before you came on, we had Mr. Iyore talk about his expectations from that Economic Sustainability Plan. So, yes, we know that from the plan that the government's put forth about 2.3 trillion naira. Of that 2.3 trillion in that plan is 500 billion, which is called a stimulus package. Now, and I asked Mr. Iyore, what are his expectations as regards the distribution of that? You as an economist and seeing that plan as it is, what do you think would happen? Do you think it will be followed through, and would following through make any difference?
Thank you so very much for inviting me and also for asking this question. I think it is a beautiful plan. I've studied the plan, although they say the devil is in the detail. But it is the type of plan we would have had 10 or 20 years ago. I'm so impressed that with this plan, if we implement it up to 60%, Nigeria will witness a lot of economic growth. And the recession we're expecting might be less. So I'm impressed. I'm so impressed that, and let me put it in this way. The fiscal policy and monetary policy people have finally come together to work hand in hand. That's why we have this beautiful plan. MFLA, as the CBN governor, is going to end up becoming the best ever CBN governor we have had. Because not only he has taken the bull by the horn, but he has taken an unconventional route that no CBN governor since the creation of this country and the running CBN has ever done that. He has discovered that there's no way small businesses can be empowered, can be financed using commercial banks. Commercial banks are looking after their shareholders and investors' interests. And as a result, they have no interest in helping small businesses, let alone micro businesses. So he has discovered that and is investing directly in the small, micro, and startup businesses. That is beautiful. Now we look at the plan they have in place. For me, it is what we would have done many years ago, but be it as it may, it is okay now. WTO has the neoliberals who have been pushing for countries to all join hands together, open their borders. WTO is in crisis because of this COVID-19, and Nigeria must take advantage of the crisis in order to internalize this economy, that is the world-looking economy, and ensure no goods that could be made in Nigeria are allowed into this country. So if we do implement this plan, I will assure you that this plan will take us very far, especially because it will allow small businesses to actually grow, and it will also come up with the job creation and reduce poverty and unemployment. So for me, it is a good plan, but along the line, we have to talk about some of the details. One of the things I want CBN to do is CBN must create Venture Bank of Nigeria so that the investment angle of CBN must be professionally handled by an agency that could be called Venture Bank of Nigeria. Because CBN will have difficulty following the small investors and the highly technological products that they may not understand the details. So that is an area I want CBN to go into. Another one is, if we are talking about a world-looking economy, we must increase the local content to cover visually most items that could be made in Nigeria. For example, I have been the advocate of let's stop foreigners to come here and set up commercial businesses like shops, like Shoprite and Co. And they bring 99.99% of what they sell from overseas, especially from China and things like that. We must come up with a local content policy that will ensure that 70% of what anybody sells in Nigeria, those mega supermarkets, must be locally sourced. This way, our local producers will have market for their products, so that when you give them funding, they'll be able to get a market to merge it and be able to pay for the loans.
You've made some suggestions here that I'll just move it to Mr. Yere and see what he thinks, if that would help in meeting his expectations that this plan would move the nation and indeed its people forward. Mr. Yere, before we went on that break, you were talking about what you thought could have happened. You said the medical team, the medical personnel in Nigeria can handle the situation if properly equipped. But within that period, we've had resident doctors go on strike and return, suspend the strike, and they're back again. But then the issue of welfare is still there. There are some who say they've not been taken care of, their emoluments have not been paid as they should have. Maybe they've been paid right now. But as that Wednesday, Thursday, a couple of people that spoke to me said they had not been settled and the issues of welfare and insurance were there to play. But Mr. Ewengbara talks about local content manufacturing and sale, if that is looked into. So if you look at local content manufacturing and sale and then local content in terms of personnel, put the two of them together, would that help to meet your expectations?
I will say so, but you've got to go into the history of how we got here. You must realize that the real sector was totally destroyed because of the exchange rates. They were punitive, made it not sensible to produce locally. So it's not as if we didn't have a local drug manufacturing sector before 1988. So if you don't address those issues and the currency is declining at a regular basis, it's difficult for anyone who has long-term plan to execute. And drugs are not manufactured overnight. If today they manufacture and make an assumption that you'll buy it at 5 naira, and that 5 naira is worth $1, and then after they've manufactured, it then becomes that $5, then that 5 naira becomes 30 cents. It's totally out of the picture. So those are the issues. And for the large for too long, we've depended on the dollar remittances or the exchange rate as a means of running the economy. We become a dollar-focused economy. This gives us an opportunity to press the reset button and change that trend and ensure that the impetus for growth in the economy is not the dollar, but the naira. And I think that's what we need to do. I don't think the skills required for manufacturing don't exist. They do exist here. I know that a lot of all of the serious work that was being done in the University of Ibadan in those days met world standards. So, but you must agree that the team that is working now is trying to overturn 40 years of wrong planning, and that's not easy. But again, we can't keep giving excuses. We need to do it. Let's give it a try and see how well it works. That's my input.
Okay, Mr. Ewengbara, part of that package includes some level of borrowing. They called it low-cost loans that are interventionary from the central bank. The borrowing plan as it is, some economists argue that Nigeria is borrowed too much. And then some others will say the borrowing as against the GDP is still okay, we can still play around that. But if we continue at this level of borrowing, even at this time, would that help?
This is a very beautiful question, and it's a complex question when you do not understand the mechanics of economics. You see, Nigeria is under-borrowed, and Nigeria is over-borrowed when you look at the items that we borrowed money for. Now, Nigeria is under-borrowed when you look at our debt to GDP, but Nigeria is over-borrowed when you look at our debt service to revenue ratio.
Okay, Mr. Ewengbara, just hold on a second. We'll come back to you. Let's get back to Mr. Yere and see. Mr. Yere, you were saying something. We didn't get that.
Yeah, you were saying if the borrowing or the money that's going to be given will deliver the results. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, you ask the question.
Yeah, that's the question, even though I directed it to Mr. Ewengbara. But Head and weigh in on it. Then we'll go to Mr. Egbara.
I didn't quite get, Mr. Egbe, I didn't quite get what you said.
No, I said the question, I directed it to Mr. Egbara as regards the borrowing. So maybe we should just go back to Mr. Egbara so that he can finish his answer, then we'll come back to you, because he's just made one statement there. Nigeria is over-borrowed, Nigeria is under-borrowed, but we'll come back to you. Let Mr. Egbara finish his response to that question.
Thank you. So Nigeria has been borrowing for consumption rather than for investment. And anybody who borrows for consumption rather than investment will have a high cost of servicing his debt. So what Nigeria needs to do right now, and I've said the time with that number, we have to externalize our borrowing, which means external borrowing, which is cheaper and which is targeted at investment. Now we reduce our domestic loans so that we allow small businesses and other businesses to take advantage of the debt market. But the good thing about domestic loans is that you can actually do quantitative easing, or you do loan buyback. And that's what I've been telling this government to do, any government to do. Look, we can no longer service our domestic debt. It is too huge. So what we need to do is to do quantitative easing. And I think gradually this government is doing it. That's why they are looking at CBN to provide the bulk of the money for this plan they have. So in essence, I will encourage this government to borrow using debt sustainability analysis to ensure that there's a plan for the money to be borrowed and the plan to pay back the loan. That will mean that you're able to come up with a plan to show the return on investment of the loan we are having and how it can be able to pay back a loan. If we do that, Nigeria can borrow up to 70% of its GDP. Most countries are over 150, 120, 110 of their GDP. And the truth of the matter is that if you are in a business and you believe in your business, you will continuously invest in your business. And to invest in your business, you have to borrow, because you may not have the money within your revenue to improve your investment. So there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but we have to go back to the drawing board and ensure our borrowing is actually targeted at investments, and those investments must have high return on the debt, rather than borrowing for consumption or for social services that we actually have any serious return on the investment or on the loan. Thank you.
Okay, let me go take it to you, Mr. Yore. He said Nigeria is overborrowed, Nigeria is underborrowed, but Nigeria has been borrowing for consumption. But then, even if Nigeria must borrow, we need to borrow more externally, because as it stands, the nation can't even service its local borrowing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that, but to a large extent, you can't say because you might die, you will not take medication, because ultimately there is some measure of sensible borrowing. There's no one single approach that will deliver us out of this quagmire, which has been on for more than 40 years. And I'm not in the team. I don't know how they've come into their conclusions. But you really cannot refuse to borrow. All we're saying that if you borrow and there's a deficit, there must be a plan that the economy will grow enough to either reduce that deficit or take it out completely. Those facts I do not have. I don't think any country can perform if it doesn't borrow. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Indonesia, they're building a new capital. They'll do that in 5 years, and it's not going to affect their budget at all. So it's difficult to say if you don't have the facts to say whether they're overborrowed or underborrowed. If you look at the ratios, I don't think they're overborrowed. The question I always ask is, the money you have spent, where is the value that we've seen? If you turn the economy around, does it reflect in the pricing of the currency? Is unemployment reduced? All of those issues that need to come into play. It's not a single subject analysis. It's a multidisciplinary approach. Thank you.
The question of value on return is something that a lot of people are concerned about. Yes, indeed, Nigeria's borrowed so much, but the value on return is not really evident. But with this program now that the government is coming up with, Mr. Egbara is suggesting the central bank sets up something like a venture bank where whatever is borrowed is actually invested and monitored. again, the question of multiplicity of functions, wouldn't that be a problem?
Well, you see, I'm always very, sorry for the central bank, if I must use that word, because really the idea is to be able to look out for inflation and catch it before it ruins the economy. But for quite a while now, the central bank has been both the work of the Treasury and monetary policy control, not out of wanting to do it, but because nothing really is happening. And if those things don't exist appropriately, there's no fair balance between monetary policy and your fiscal policy. It's also going to be difficult for banks who are basically set up to make a profit to gamble with their depositors and shareholders' resources. That is the issue. That's the real issue. And we've been saying this since 1988, that you can't do these things one at a time. And you can't decide these things based on the bubble you belong into, but rather driven by competence. And I think there are competent people all over Nigeria, from every village. But very often, like you see, for example, now, the NNPC is returning profits in many of the sectors. And you ask yourself, why? Because people know that you won't mess around with the guy who's minister, which is the president. If he leaves, what happens? Those are the issues, and we need to be able to come in to raise our public conversation. The level of public debates is left to who gets what, who doesn't get what. It's all tactical, no long-term strategic planning. You want to reduce interest rates when you haven't planned what you need to do with your fiscal policy or all of the triggers you need to do. Those are the issues I want to look at, and I don't think you can exhaustively do a good job on a short program like this. Thank you.
All right, we've been joined by Mr. Bongo Adi, Dr. Bongo Adi, who's a lecturer at the Lagos Business School. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Adi.
Thank you very much.
This matter of the economic recovery, the sustainability plan that's been approved on Wednesday.
Yes.
Now, before you came, we talked about how much was put forward, about 2.3 trillion. We also talked about the stimulus package, 500 billion. The question on the minds of a lot of people is the sustainability of the sustainability plan. Won't those monies, the stimulus package, for instance, would it get to where it's supposed to get? Will it not be siphoned? That's a concern. I mean, Mr. Mwegbara and Mr. Yuri have mentioned the effectiveness of this plan. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think if people are questioning or having some reservations regarding the sustainability of the sustainability plan, I think it's justified because in the past 8 years, since 2012, this is the third set of plans that we're having. We started.
But it's considered a transition plan.
Whether it's transitional or you know, whatever it is a plan. So we had a transitional plan during the recession, which is the ERGP, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Before then, don't forget that we had a plan under the Jonathan administration at the tail end of it in 2012, 2013, the National Infrastructure Master Plan and as well as the National Industrial Revolution Plan. So those were collapsed into the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan of 2016, 2017. So we're just 3 years into the implementation, and then we have not seen any sort of impact evaluation of what happened, what transpired, what worked, what didn't work. Now,
blame it on the pandemic.
Yeah?
Blame it on the pandemic.
Well, we blame it on the pandemic. Now, the pandemic what actually has happened, you know, that has not been happening in this economy, okay? The pandemic, yes. I know that it's exposed our weaknesses. We had this because when you look at the pandemic, it's bouncing back. So given the, you know, that means that we were somewhere, you know, then the pandemic took us back and then we want to come out of it. But I think we are still where we were then. So what the sustainability plan, you know, is supposed to deal with are still the same structural issues that we have in the economy. Now the question is, how sure are we, or how convinced are we that the government has the wherewithal to execute the plan, to implement it, and then, I mean, achieve the right results? People are talking about, overheard you talking about return on investment. We are borrowing money for all this. How are we sure that we will get value for the money that we are getting? So, well, your guess is as good as mine because the structural issues that we have in the system that has undermined the previous plans are still there.
Okay. We'll need to go on another break. We'll come back to continue the conversation. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We're still looking at the Economic Sustainability Plan. We have Mr. Odizime Egbao in our Abuja studio. Mr. Charles Yuri joined us from Kent, England. We also have Dr. Bongo Adi, a lecturer at Lagos Business School, here in our studio. Now, as we wind down now, gentlemen, let's bring this home to the man who's selling bread out there. I mean, the simple economy in Nigeria. Because while we have such a beautiful plan, as Mr. Egbao has described as a very viable plan, it's workable if it's followed through and through. The man who's running a simple business, how's he going to survive? I'll read this tweet and then the three of you will win. I'll begin with you, Dr. Adi. So Professor Imonokai says, our economy has already been broken. Federal government should be talking about economic recovery and how it can be reflated by diversifying the economy, reduce the recurrent expenditures and interest rates. He says, the sustainability plans must give feasible disbursement plans that are actually accessible by our SMEs, including farmers. They are the mainstay of any economy. They bridge the gap between the growing middle class, increase productivity, and generate employment. Dumping of goods that can be produced locally must be abrogated. Refinance the real sector with policies that are not short-termed. If agriculture is well financed and licenses are given to modular refineries to generate employment and genuinely reflate the economy. So, Dr. Adi.
Yeah. So if I, start to cherry pick what that professor commented, if you talk about modular refineries, the problem of modular refineries is not about licensing. It's about the overarching regulation. Okay, so you cannot have a modular refinery, compete in an economy where price is regulated. So before you have any sort of modular refinery being operational, it's been on for a very long time now, the whole issue about modular refineries and privatized. We have to deregulate the sector completely, make it competitive so that anybody, any Dick, Tom or Harry can set up a refinery and then drive it to productivity and competitiveness. Unless that happens, it becomes just rhetoric. Now, let's talk about the small things, okay? Not about the plans. It's not about the stimulus package. It's not about all the things, because we've had plans, as I said. Now, this is about protecting the citizen, okay, from the shock of the pandemic. Okay. In other countries, we've seen what, in addition to giving palliatives and giving people money directly, because they know their citizens, they have the data, they know who does what, they know how this has affected each person, because over time they have built up vital statistics. That is exactly the basic thing that is lacking, the most fundamental thing, basic statistics. We don't have that. We don't know anybody. We don't know who does what. And then we do not even know how to assess them. So when we are making plans at that high overarching level, we don't even know how it's going to get to the man on the street. So the first thing we needed to do is to protect them from the shock that they've experienced. Now, everybody's still paying rent. In some countries, what they did, like in Germany, okay, let's be specific. Germany protected citizens from landlords, okay? They made it illegal for landlords to ask for rent during this pandemic. So they were postponed. They've been able to postpone most of these things, even taxes. So they gave tax waivers to SMEs, to all businesses. So they're not collecting any taxes. But that has not happened in Nigeria. There is no way that the average man has been protected from the shock. So let's talk about protection first before you ask of what you are going to give to them. You have not protected people, and then you're talking about giving them something. So you see that it doesn't really work.
Okay. Mr. Ayere?
Well, I'll just concentrate. I'll concentrate on what you're doing for the farmers. I'd like to let you know that since independence in all African countries, we left some people behind in the countryside. What they want is not money to buy big machines or large loans. They need some of that. What they want is a price stability. In other words, where are the merchant acceptances who will buy those goods for them at a certain fixed price? You can sell a tuber of yam last year for 1,000 naira, and this year is struggling to get 500 naira for it. What you will find is that all those farm hands will drift into the urban centers to do light industrial work. We've left this going on for more than 40 years. So the critical thing is to say, how can we guarantee that those goods bought, not just those items produced, not just the cash crops, but also the food crops, have a certain measure of an acceptance locally, and then a city center where you have a syndicated buyers selling them to those who finally use them. Now, always talk about fair trading, like I've always said, will not be determined in Brussels, Belgium, or Chicago. it will be determined at the farm gate. The prices and incomes of those in the rural countryside needs to be protected, not giving them money, buying their produce so that the next year they can put more energy into it. And the large populations you have drifting around in the urban centers will go back because they can make a living in the countryside. We left those guys in the countryside since 1960. Nothing has happened ever since then. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Nwara.
Thank you. First and foremost, let me make this thing clear. Let me make this thing clear as quickly as possible. You know, monetary stability or currency stability is not what you just fix. Nobody does that because it is determined by market forces. All CBN have been doing is dirty floating, which is the interventionist monetary policy. But I believe that we get to the point of clean floating where intervention is ceases to exist. Let me also make this thing clear. You know, in 1933, when America was in a deep Great Depression, two important people were brought on board. They were neither economists nor anything that has to do with economy. One was Marian Eccles, who was a secondary school dropout to become the Fed chairman, that is CBN, that's the central bank governor. And the another one was Henry McIntyre, who was a two-year architecture dropout, who was made the Treasury Secretary. Everybody was skeptical. But eventually these people returned, reformed, and made the American economy social system driven. So what I'm saying in essence is that, you know, when we talk about these things, let's be a bit clear with the points we're making. I believe that the person talking about not knowing the identity of Nigerians is good. Is right. But we have to come up with social security number. Every Nigerian, as soon as he's giving birth, will have a social security number and die with that social security number. So that we know your social status, whether you are rich or poor, so that when there are issues like this, you know where to intervene. You know those Nigerians, you can quickly meet through your fiscal or monetary or your fiscal intervention, like giving some money or some good support to them. But what this government is doing, I love most, is the ability to allow a small business to have access to market and access to financing. And CBN is giving them access to financing, and the fiscal policy makers are in the process now giving them access to market. These are the two things that will revolutionize our economy, because great economies are driven by small businesses, not by large businesses. And we can talk here from here till tomorrow, but I will assure you that if we implement this into to the greatest point, Nigeria will start seeing economic growth and an inclusive economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Odilime Egbara, development economist, Charles Iyore, principal partner, Dion & Associates, CTA, who joined us from Kent, England, and Dr. Bongo Adi, lecturer, Lagos Business School. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
With us.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Nwabara said something there. I just thought I should bring that up. Say something about social security number. There is a national identity number issue that has been going on before the pandemic even hit, and I think it's still happening. You can do that online on your own. The National Identity Management Commission is handling that. I think that will help to gather data. That's what they say. We're trying to collate the data of Nigerians, and that might also help to put things in perspective for the population. But so, we'll be back in a moment. Do stay with us.